Hi, welcome to Lighthouse Living Room. This is Pastor Mark, your host for the next 40 minutes or so. We're going to be taking a look at what I call pancake gospel, believe it or not. Am I enough? One of the biggest challenges in life is to be able to see things clearly. And as I've said in the past, that many times people will see an accident, 4 different people will have 4 different versions of what took place. Tonight, we're going to take a look at 4 different versions of the same event, but from different Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Why am I saying that? It's because there's some very interesting things that transpired out of this story. The story is the feeding of the 5,000, by which it is actually all of these accounts happened at the same time with 4 people watching it, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they're having 4 different versions, or similar versions, if you will. Now, why is this important? Because this is an interesting antidote to what's going on in the world today in regards to how people are seeing things. We find that many of the people today have allowed ourselves to become conditioned by what we have heard from a lot of other different sources, much of which we see mainstream media, for instance, lying to us about a ton of different things, and we accept the lie as truth when the truth is not true. It's a lie. So we need to see what it's talking about. And one of the things that I find very interesting is that when I make, preparation for something along this line, it's whether I'm talking to one person or I'm talking to 1,000 people. It does make a difference on how you present it and what it sounds like. If you have something to write with tonight, I would suggest that you write these scriptures down, because this is what we're going to be taking a look at. And then I'm going to ask you to do some things that go with the study. And it's interesting that I think that you will find it very fascinating what has been left out, what has been added, and what was not said at all in each of these different accounts of the feeding of the 5,000. Now, first of all, we need to understand what was transpiring in regards to time frame. What happened? Jesus was on the hillside when he got word that John the Baptist had died. Now, it wasn't that he died all along, but the fact is that his head was taken from him, and pretty ugly way that it all went down. But the fact is, it was pretty ugly anyway. And then he went up into the mountains to pray and basically, I believe, grieve, because John the Baptist was not only a cousin, but he's the guy that ushered his ministry into reality. He's the one that baptized Jesus. This is the one that was there when God spoke from the heavens down onto his son. He was there when all of this went down. So there's a lot of things going on. And then, of course, all of these things that we see happening here in this one story, the feeding of the 5,000. Fascinating. So let me give you those scriptures. If you've got a minute, you got something to write with? You write these down. In Matthew 14, 13 through 20. Same story in Mark 6, 30 through 43. Luke chapter 9, 10 through 17. And John chapter 6, verses 1 through 15. Now, there's a term that they use in regards to having something like this happen called pancaking, or what you call overlaying. Pancaking is probably the one term that a lot of people would recognize better than others. Is you stack a bunch of pancakes together, you see them, they can be 8 high. Well, this happens to be 4 high. And this is the same story being told from a different set of eyes, different mouth, different writing, but all the same story. Now, probably one of my favorite stories, I would have to say, especially with everything that happened. The little boy, all of the other things that were going on. But after his disciples had kind of done their thing, Jesus' replies is astounding in how he deals with this situation. Now, let's take a look at it. Now, what follows the miracle, Jesus and the disciples used the little boy's lunch for the day, 5 loaves and 2 fish, okay? If you're not familiar with the Sea of Galilee, I believe that there's like 15 different varieties of sardine, if you will, or looks like sardine. I call them, they're probably a different name for them, in that lake, all different kinds, and they come in various sizes. So a little boy's lunch, 2 fish that have been dried, or 2 fish that have been, what we call them freeze-dried, I guess would be a best term, preserved, where they let them air dry outside, and then they take them off, skin and all, after they've been gutted, and then they can peel the skin off and they can eat this kind of, I don't know, it's kind of maybe a kosher sardine. I don't know how you look that. But anyway, 2 small fish, he said, and 5 loaves. What are the 5 loaves? They were barley loaves, and they weren't very big. They were probably about like this, kind of something like we would get when we get a double set of cupcakes from Hostess or whatever. And they were in this kid's lunch. So they took this massive crowd of people. Now, what makes this even more interesting is that a lot of people don't understand that in the New Testament, they only counted men. So it says that Jesus fed the 5,000. Well, think about that for a moment. So let's say if it's the nuclear family, like we have today, that would be the dad, the mom, and 1.5 kids. So for sake of not splitting hairs, let's do 2 children. So that's 4. So basically what is being said, these people couldn't go to, they couldn't go down to McDonald's, because McDonald's, there weren't McDonald's back then. It was getting past nightfall. Everything's closed. There's no place to go into the marketplace and buy anything. There was 5,000 people there, but more like 20,000 people there, which is astonishing to me that he's speaking to 20,000 people, and 20,000 people could hear every word that he was saying without any kind of a microphone or a PA system. I just think it's pretty fantastic. It's like going to a very large football game and being able from the bottom of the field down there on the goal line and speak to the whole place. That's one of the reasons why he would always go under the water and out on the water and then speak. He'd push off in a boat and speak from a boat, because if you've ever been on a lake or been on water, if you speak in a normal tone of voice, a mile away, someone can hear you. It's fascinating. But that's what happened. Now, all of that being said, and then after he begins, and lack of a better term, he starts handing out all these fish tacos, because we're going to just say that they cut the bread in half and they put the fish in between and blah, blah, blah. And they gave all these out there, and these AKA fish tacos, and the results are amazing. 20,000 people get everything that they need to eat, and there was stuff left over. Just saying. So, it wasn't a measly portion, because people fed until they were full, it says. In other words, they may have had seconds. I don't know. 2 fish tacos, I go for 4, just saying. And so for me, as a guy, I probably would want 4 fish tacos. Okay, so I got 4 fish tacos. Now, this is an amazing story. 20,000 people have been fed. We see it being repeated in 4 different books, all the same story, all the same outcome. Now, what we need to understand is what was being done. Jesus knew the people were hungry, both spiritually and physically. And you know, Danny Curl, God rest his soul, passed away a couple years ago. He'd still be around today if he wouldn't have been in an accident in Zimbabwe. But Danny Curl used to say something, and he told me when he was in Bella Vista 25, 30 years ago. He said to me something that really shocked me and put things in perspective. When he would go places and he'd try to share the gospel, he said that if people are hungry, he said you need to fill them. You cannot give them spiritual food until you fill them with physical food. Once you met that need, they're open for whatever it is that God wants to do in their lives. And so he would take 35-pound bags of cornmeal. I know this sounds bizarre, but that's what they would have, 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. A 35-pound I think when we were doing it back then, it was about $20 for 35 pounds, or basically equal in size probably to a 50-pound bag, but that 35 pounds would last a family for 1 month. And we used to buy hundreds of bags, and we'd send money to Danny, and he would go and distribute them. So once he went into a village and he gave everybody food and fed everybody, he would come in a couple of weeks and he would begin to give them spiritual food, and that would be Jesus, and man, great stuff happened. So there's no difference in what happened here. Now, there were bags left over. So now, most of the headers that we talk about is that there were 5,000 people present, but there's more like 20,000, right? Number two, this miracle is reminiscent of the one God fed the Israelites with manna in the wilderness. That's pretty wild. It's in its own right. Think about that. The thing that's even more interesting, that manna, if you look it up in the Strongs and ask for a definition of what manna was, it was interesting that manna actually, when you took and picked up manna and you put it in your basket and you took it home and you fed everyone, Johnny would eat the manna and it would taste like fish tacos. Sister Debbie would eat the manna and it would taste like chocolate cake. Another one would eat the manna and it would taste like steak and potatoes. It's amazing because it said that whatever your mind, if you were longing for or wanting, it would have. Even though the consistency didn't change, it had a different taste to every person that ate it. Very fascinating to me. I don't know how 1 million people could eat manna every day, but I guess that's how it worked. But now that one of the Jewish traditions that they had, and in a larger scale, if you will, with the manna, 1 million people basically, they would go out and gather. It was outside on their tent in the morning, and they would come and get it, and it would be good for the day. They couldn't keep it overnight, because if they did, it was full of maggots, which is bizarre. But then the next day, they would be funny. And then on the Sabbath, they would pick up enough for 2 days. And then they would, the following day, they would go out and harvest more of it. It's just amazing. I don't know how that works, but I tell you what, I've got some questions when I get to heaven. I want to chat with God and find out what it's like. I'm thinking, man, it's more like cotton candy to me. Just saying. It's kind of what it is. Anyway. So don't miss this now. The foreshadowing for the disciples of sharing this thing with the 5,000 while he was on the planet is a foreshadow of what took place in Sinai, or in the desert, in the wilderness, if you will. And then this is just amazing that all of this would happen, and then spiritually he was ministering to them in other ways. Now, so open for business 24/7. This is what it is. Notice that the reaction of the disciples in all 4 accounts, they are quick to say, Jesus, these people really need to get going, or else all the McDonald's will be closed before they get home. And Jesus, because of his kindness and because he's the host that he was, he said, don't send them home, find something for them to eat. This freaked out the disciples. What do you mean, find something for them to eat? I mean, they went over to the guy that was holding all the money, and he goes, we got $29.38. I don't think we can handle it. That's all we have. Well, the problem was that they weren't thinking like Jesus was thinking. Find some food and bring it. So they found the little lunch. They brought the lunch to him. And what happened? He did what he did. Now, we have to remember, Jesus isn't calling us to a convenient gospel. He's calling us to a disruptive, different type of class of people. What do you need to do to get the word out to those that are out there? People who need to hear the gospel. I think that we need to understand that. So let's be real. What is a circumstance or a person that is challenging you, that God is calling you to go and grow patient with? Who is it that's causing you problems that you need to find some patience about? I don't know. How is he calling you to be more like Jesus where you're currently not being cool? Remember, these people were getting grumbly because their stomachs were rolling and growling. These people were getting unruly because they were not having their need met. Sometimes in our lives, we find people that are like that all the time, and how do you deal with them? What do you do with them next? Now, Jesus asks us to own our faith. When he talked to the disciples about going and finding food, they didn't own their faith. They were skeptical. They were doubting. They didn't know what to do next. Now, why is this important? Our biggest challenge in life is to understand where we stand in the bigger picture. How do we deal with that? Notice what Jesus says in the ESV translation of the text. You give them something to eat. He could have easily stopped the chaos and said, hold up, I'm Jesus. Fuba, fuba, ding. There it was. So what he did, what did he do? He said, you go find them something to eat. And so the best they could do was go find this little guy's lunch, which I think is pretty. Sometimes we need to be confident in the plan that Jesus gives us. I mean, think about it. I don't know how many times we've done that where on Memorial Day we would do hot dogs or we would do hamburgers. We do hamburgers and something, and we do like 200 or 300 of them, and 500 people show up. Don't ask me how they all got fed, but they did. I don't know. That happened 3 times, 3 years running. We would do that. We would go out there and we barbecue and we do all of the stuff that we're doing. We hold this big shish bang wazoo for Memorial Day. We invite everybody to come to our block party and just enjoy themselves together with us. And the next thing you know, they're telling me, we've only got 200 hot dogs, or we've only got 200 hamburgers. And the next thing you know, there's 500 people in line. 500 people show up, and that means 500 people need to get fed. 500 people walked away with food. 500 people ate food, ate all of the chips that we had and all of the water that we could provide. And the thing is that I have no idea where it came from. Sometimes you need to own the plan. Think about it. Jesus wants you to own the plan, even though it doesn't look like it's going to work out. That's where faith comes in, right? Own your plan. It's not your plan anyway. It's his. Own the plan. Have faith. Let it happen. Now, here's a question. How are you struggling to own your faith right now? I don't know. What's happening in your life that you need to own? What are you struggling with right now that you need to own? In what areas do you need to have a tune-up? You know what a tune-up is, right? My car's not running all that great. I'm going to go in and have new wires and new spark plugs, change the oil. I'm going to give it a new air filter because the other one's plugged up. The engine can't breathe. And so I'm going to do all of that. I'm going to get a tune-up so my car will run better and get better gas mileage. Spiritually, where do you need a tune-up? Or do you need a tune-up? Or do you not know? Good question. Now, something else that we find in the story that's very, very interesting when it comes to trying to do something for God. Jesus calls us to use what we have. Jesus calls us to use what we have. What do you have that can meet the need at this time for those people that are out there, for that person that you can't? I had an incredible experience this week. I told you about a friend of mine that texted me and said to me, what do I have to do to meet Jesus? It actually said, do you think Jesus would listen to me if I asked him into my heart? I said, in a heartbeat. I said, go for it. I haven't seen him in the 3 or 4 weeks since that text, but I saw him on Friday. When I sat down with him, he just looked different to me. And he said something to me that I thought was very interesting. He and his son both were in the office when I was talking to them. And he said, I was telling them about some of the things that are going on in the world, some of the things that are happening through the election, but that not to take heart that God's in control of what's going on. And I said something to him, and he said, that's a really good word. That's very positive. I like that. And then he said this to me. He said, I need a Bible. What Bible would you recommend? I said, I'm trying to read every night. And I said, boom. I said, I'm on that. ESV, Study Bible, large print. Hallelujah. I said, I'll get that happening so you have one. Now, why is that important? It's because he's made a confession of faith, and now he's moving to solidify that by reading the Word. Powerful stuff. Jesus says, use what we have. What does that mean? Now, nowhere in these stories does it say that Jesus asked the disciples to run to Target or to go to Smart and Final. Didn't tell them to go down to Smart and Final and get some kale chips and say, why don't you see what else you can find? Because they had $29.95, and that wasn't enough to feed 20,000 people. I mean, really. I mean, even today in the multiplication theology, it ain't going to work, right? Okay, so it's simply not part of the story. Jesus asked the disciples to use what they have. Their inventory for feeding such a large crowd didn't seem substantial enough to be able to get the job done. And that's pretty true. We know that for a fact. But Jesus isn't asking us to go out into the world and look for the missing pieces. He's asking you to use what you have to glorify His name. Now, He knows who you are. He knows what you bring to the table. He knows how to use it, but He also knows how to make it work in those circumstances. Now, here's the question. What is the gift or strength that you have that would love to see, that Jesus would love to see be used by you for Him this year? Let that sink in. What is the gift or strength that you have that Jesus would love to see you use for His glory? Don't know? Maybe you should think out of the box. Just a little more. Watch this. Jesus provides more than enough. Now, I love at the end of this feeding frenzy, the fish taco deal, that He goes out and there's 12 baskets of bread left over. This is hard for me to even grasp. Now, there's 12 disciples, but there's also 12 baskets. What kind of baskets were they? What did they look like? How much does that, what does that really mean? Well, in this situation, a basket was about 4 feet in height, 30 inches in diameter at the top, and tapered down to the bottom. 12 of those were filled with the remnants that 20,000 people didn't eat. That's pretty darn good. If you could do that on a regular basis when you feed a large group and only have a little tiny bit left over, that's good. That's great. But look what He started with. 5 little Twinkies and 2 fish. And He had 12 baskets left over. I don't know about you, but Jesus always provides more than enough. More than enough. Now, think about this for a moment. Jesus didn't do anything halfway. He always did it all the way. Made sure they were filled all the way to the top. Probably the best fish tacos these people had ever ate. A little cafe across the street has just opened up, and I went over there today to meet somebody, and I had some tamales, the homemade tamales, chicken. Wow, they were great. I remember that. I'm going to have more of those just because they taste so good. What about these fish tacos? They probably were the best these guys ever had. Remember, in your life, think about this now, bigger picture, big C. In your life, when has God showed up and did more abundantly for you than you thought? If you can't think of a time, you need to start thinking about a time. God wants to do something in your life that's more abundantly than you thought it would be. Bigger, more grand. Think about it. Now, let's dig a little deeper. I want to look a little closer at the account from John, a couple of reasons, because this is what he said. Something to know about John. He really doesn't like to go with the crowd. I mean, if you've read through John, it's a very personal, eyeball to eyeball with Jesus type thing. Okay, now why do I say that? You don't often find him recalling or recording stories about others wrote before him, so a big deal that he was here was retelling the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. Now, why? I imagine that John in present day would have been a dude who wrote a really wordy, reflective captions on Instagram. I love John's account of Jesus' life most because he was an extra detailed, and he also was very, really confident in what he was writing. But let's look closer at the two distinct details that appear in just John's account only. And if you go back and look, you'll notice that it's more verses than the other three together. It's more verses being written in John than it is in the other three accounts. It's very interesting. Now, first, Jesus' interaction with Philip. Why do you think Jesus asked Philip where would they manage to get food if he already knew what the miracle was that he was about to perform? Why do you think he would ask Philip that? You need to write that down. That's thought. Why do you think Jesus asked Philip, where do you think he'll get the food from? No, McDonald's, maybe they'll go to Burger Queen, no, that wasn't how it worked because they didn't have them. Maybe down at the fish market, you go through that routine. Why do you think he did that? To make him think about provision, make him think about what it looked like. Second, the little boy with the loaves and fishes as a lunch. Why do you think all of the people, Jesus used the little boy's lunch to complete his miracle? Why do you think he used that? Because the little boy was willing to give it, because of how he feels about kids. What do you think? Why do you think that's important? I think it's very interesting. It's a very interesting observation. What was going through the mind of this child? Little guy, I don't know how old he was. Maybe he was 12 or less. Mom packed his lunch. Can you imagine him coming home with 12 extra baskets of food? I'm just saying. Well, this is the kid that gave us the lunch. Let's just give him all the extra and have him take it home to the family. Wow. It's kind of like after church here at the Lighthouse, and the next thing you know, he said, we got chicken in the side room, which, by the way, we do this following week. But anyway. Now, I've got a little anxiety. It's been a thing for me for a long time. I've had many instances where I can look back and remember being too scared or too doubtful or insecure in a lot of areas, too afraid I'd mess up things, and especially when there's a group of people, and I just couldn't deal with that. For as long as I can remember, I tried to please people more than I tried to please God. Let me tell you something about that. It's not a win-win thing. It's a bad thing. To always think that you have to impress people over God. The only person you need to worry about is the Lord. The Lord will make everything else fall in place. Now, I'm sure some of these performance-based feelings cropped up in the hearts of the disciples, if you think about it. Because Philip, actually from Bethsaida, closest town which this miracle was taking place, imagine feeding 5,000 people from your own hometown. Oh, I know that guy. That's Philip. I know him. I've heard he's been running around with the Messiah or the Jesus. I don't know. He's kind of a crazy kid. He's always had little issues, little tick and that type of thing. But the thing is that when you're in a hometown, people know who you are. Being part of the solution can be a very interesting situation. Think about it. Now, how about this? There's some things that we need to understand about all of the things that we were talking about. We were talking about being enough for the moment. Philip was one of those guys. He dropped everything to follow Jesus. He did what he was doing, and a lot of people admired him for that now, but back then that was kind of crazy. Be like one of us dropping and doing everything and going on a mission. Selling everything we have and then leaving to go on a mission, not knowing when we're coming back or how we'll get back. I know for myself, my wife and I both said the same thing, that when we left Oakview in '86, that we probably would never be able to come back because the cost of everything would be so high. And the thing is that yet we are. Very interesting. So one of the things that we need to, are you enough? It's not hard to have this feeling mentally that we're just not enough or we won't be enough for the situation or do the right thing, right? The belief is that instead of an abundance, there'll be just crumbs, just a little bit of nothing. Well, let's put it in perspective a little bit. Everything that we do, if we do it in the flesh, we'll fail miserably and fall flat on our face. But if we do it for God, and we do it with the attitude that He is enough, that He is adequate to do the job, that He is more than able to handle what we're doing, and we confess that and make that a certainty, I believe that there's two things that are going to happen in your life that you're going to see immediate change in. Number one, you'll begin to win more, lose less. Win more, lose less. Why do I say that? It's because your assurance is not in you. We fail. God doesn't. That's why if you put your trust in Him, He'll do what He says He will do. Now, Scripture says that Jesus didn't ask Philip where they would get the food because He was actually worried. He asked Philip as a test. And God tests us in order to refine our faith. God tests us with those questions to find out where we're at. Now, here's what I love about Jesus. He says He makes the disciples begin to the process of providing food before the miracle shows up. In other words, they're going through the process. We do that all the time. When we come to things that need to happen and we know that they're supernatural in content or in ending, we seem to think about all of the ways that we can make that happen on our own. When Jesus didn't ask that. He asked them to get food, provide food. They started running through their head all of the ways that they could possibly do that, when reality wasn't what He asked at all. He said, the miracle's coming. What are you going to use to start it? And this was a little boy's lunch at that point. Now, the willingness and obedience of the disciples to come before the understanding of the miracle was at hand. The message for us today is that we have to step into situations with bold confidence, no matter what our anxiety might be telling us. In other words, walk into them with your eyes wide open, but your ears wide open as well. Eyes wide open, ears wide open to be able to hear what God is saying. Moving into that balance, understanding that that's where we are needing to go. Now, our eyes need to be on God, doing whatever we can to give Him the glory. In other words, we're going to funnel those things to God and let God bring the increase. We can't do it. We're incapable of doing it. But I do believe that we can do something incredibly special if we allow Jesus to be Jesus and us to just be us. Does that make sense? All right. Now, how can you flip the script today? Here's a thought. I don't think that any of us are adequate for anything in the kingdom if we do not mix it with faith. What do I mean by that? Faith in Hebrews 11:1 says, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. All right, so faith is reality, a substance that has weight and has, how can I say, texture. It has something we can hold on to. It's something we can feel. We know it is. Even though it is invisible to the naked eye, faith in you, it says, is the hope of glory. Faith in you brings about the thing that needs to happen. Remember, faith is the substance of things hoped for. What is it that you hope for? What is the most important thing in your life? Right now, what's the most important thing in your life? Oh, my grandkids. Oh, my finances. Oh, I hope that you're not. Remember, this is the first thing that we did. This is what the disciples did. They went to the natural first instead of the spiritual. They went to the natural. They said, "Whoa, I don't know. I'm going to go to Target to get this, or we're going to have to go to Walgreens. I don't know." No, We need to look at it. So what is he saying? How do we flip the script? How do we make this happen? How do we see this change? How does faith become substance in our life? Faith is the substance of things hoped for. I believe what God said. Now you're on target. I believe that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I believe that he is able and more abundantly to be able to supply all of my needs, not just one, all of them. Everything revolves around him. Here is the key. This is the issue. Now, how do you flip that script today? How do you deal with that? How do you silence the lie that you're not enough? By taking and putting the scripture back in the enemy's face. No, I'm more than a conqueror in Jesus. No, I can do these things because God says I can. I am more than, I'm a king. I am a priest. I am who I am because of what he has done for me. In other words, I'm leaning on him to put me to the right place to see this become reality. So maybe we need to steal this prayer. Let me read this prayer to you. Think about this. Dear God, I'm fearful of not having enough and not being enough for other people. Help me to change my mind. Help me to see you above and before the multitude of others. Help me to be creative and know with confidence that you always show up and offer abundance to those who believe. Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. You are more than enough. According to the Word, you are absolutely more than enough. Why do I know that? Because the Word told me that. I believe, so thus I will, and I know you can. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord shine his light all around you. And in that benediction that you would know that God is able and more than able to do above and beyond all that you can ask or think because he loves you. God sent his Son so that you could be free and live a life of victory. And you can do it because you are more than enough. So whatever you have planned in your destiny, whatever's in your mind, let Jesus be part of that. Amen? God bless you. Have a great evening and a great day and a great week. And I'll see you next Wednesday. Remember, Rabbi's coming up. We'll see you then. God bless.